Welcome. It is Thursday, February 25th, 2021. This is the second special budget meeting of two special budget meetings. This meeting of Woodstock City Council has been called for the purpose of consideration of the 2021 revenue budget. The meeting is for information and discussion purposes only. No action will be taken as the revenue budget approval is scheduled for the regular meeting of Council on March 18th, 2021. This meeting is being held electronically in accordance with Section 238, subsection 3.3 of the Municipal Act and Section 16.6.24 of the City of Woodstock Procedural Bylaw. This meeting is being live streamed to the city's YouTube channel, and a recording of this meeting will also be posted on the city's website following the meeting. An agenda of the meeting can be found on the Agendas, Meetings, and Minutes page of the city's website. Councillors will be raising their hands in view of the webcam when requesting to speak. If a member of council is disconnected or having technical difficulties, we will take a recess in order to attempt to rectify the issue. If technical difficulties exist that prevent the meeting from continuing, the meeting will be adjourned and reconvened at a later time. If a councillor needs to leave the meeting at any time, they're requested to inform the clerk. Thank you. And I'll ask that all of the councillors tune in and welcome everybody. And any disclosure of conflict of interest? And seeing none, we'll move along. And we have, again, quite a list of presentations today, and we'll get into some of the line-by-line detail by department. So with that, we'll begin, and our first department is the Clerk's Department, and that's pages 104 to 107. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I do apologize for missing the meeting on Tuesday night, so thank you very much for shoehorning me into the beginning of this meeting tonight. I very much appreciate that, so thank you, Council. I'll share my screen. Okay, I think everyone should be able to see that. Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So as Council will recall from previous years, I usually always start my presentation every year by looking back at some of the stats from the year leading into the budget. So that in this case would be 2020. So originally I had planned to put this slide up to say, okay, well, 2020 was a bit of a mess. Some of our stats are a bit misleading. So as I continue to monitor these over the years, I wouldn't necessarily look at 2020 to try to identify our trends. But as I looked at the stats, I thought it actually does a really good job, I think, of explaining some of the anomalies that we see in our 2020 actuals and explain some things we might be looking at in 2020, or pardon me, in 2021. And I think it actually gives a good idea of some of the effect the pandemic had on the department for the previous year. So I think I'm going to go ahead actually with some of the stats. So last year we were able to still perform 49 marriage ceremonies, not the easiest year for couples trying to get married. So City Hall was closed for a period of time, and there was also another period of time in which we weren't even permitted to do weddings. But fortunately, we were still able to perform this for up to 49 couples, very small, very intimate ceremonies, but we were able to help them out in that way. So that was something we were happy to do. Marriage licenses, of course, same idea, was down in 2020. Death certificates, right along the regular trend there, regardless of the pandemic and regardless of City Hall itself being closed. This is something we are legally required to issue to the crematorium as well as the funeral homes, regardless of holidays or closures or anything like that. Lottery licenses down significantly. Obviously not a lot of raffles and bingos and things like that going on last year. So we did see a sharp decrease there and accordingly had a sharp decrease in those revenues. Now, interestingly, though, our business licenses held fairly steady. We had a minor fall, but really the only decline we saw is in one particular category of our business licensing, which is the business operated on a temporary basis. So things like the toy show, for example, the wood show, those types of events that wouldn't be taking place, obviously didn't need to be licensed. But interestingly, our general business licensing was actually up from 2019. We saw more license applications coming in. Now, many of these were home-based businesses. So I'm thinking people at home looking for additional revenue for their families, or income for their families, coming in to get those licenses. Council may also recall that in the spring, they had approved waiving that licensing fee for the remainder of the 2020 year. So over that time, we waived $9,750 in revenue that would normally come into that line, just as a way to help some of the small businesses in the community. So between lottery licenses, as well as the waiver of those fees in the business licenses category, that revenue line was down $20,000 for 2020, or 45% in this particular case. Minor variances held steady, as well as zone changes continue to be busy in those areas. Liquor licenses, this number is a little misleading. We issued 18 liquor licenses in 2020. Now, only 2 of those were the standard liquor licenses. In fairness, not a lot of new bars or establishments were opening during that time. But 16 of those liquor licenses were the pop-up patio licenses. So established businesses that either extended their license out into their parking lot or out into the street, they required a very specific license from AGCO. So we saw 16 of those last year. FOI requests held steady. Paratransit applications was down. Now, this was because we actually extended a number of the applicants' eligibility, just to avoid those applicants having to go to the doctor during the pandemic. So that is the reason that we see a decline here. Commissioner Vos was down almost entirely, again, because City Hall was closed at different times. Now, interestingly, I found the pieces of mail that we processed was actually down in 2020. Given that we were closed or interacting with our clients in a different way, I expected to see that number up. Now, what you'll actually see in the expense, though, of our postage is that we were over budget for 2020. So when I looked into it a little further, it was actually that the couriers that the departments were sending were up. So some of those larger packages or ways that we're trying to interact with the clients that we're serving in a fast way without physically seeing them. So I could see that we actually sent more couriers last year, even though we sent fewer pieces of mail sort of through that traditional route. Also, interestingly, the average number of children that we crossed per day in 2020 remained steady. I expected perhaps a slight decline here, given that we know that a lot of students in the fall stayed home for online learning. But those numbers look pretty consistent for our guard group. Now, we had actually originally budgeted $217,000 in wages for 2021 for the guards, but we have since reduced that to $195,000 to account for the January layoff for the guards. So the Treasury Department was able to make that last minute change to our budget, just because we know already that those guards were laid off for the month of January. So we decreased that budget line by $22,000 for 2021, as the guards' wages are about $5,500 a week. So we're able to get that line adjusted. So thank you to the Treasury Department for that. Now, just one last note about revenues. We have reduced our dog tag revenue by 50% for 2021. Council will recall at the January Council meeting, they approved our recommendation to discontinue the dog tag licensing program effective in 2022. So we do expect to see those revenues down in 2021 as well. I don't think we'll see as much uptake, but also our 2022 licensing would actually start in November of 2021. So we should see a reduction. But of course, for 2022, that budget line will be reduced to zero. Now, just 2 notes from us with respect to our expenses for the 2021 budget. The general liability insurance, you will see an increase of 10% on that budget line. We had an 8% increase last year. And you may recall last year me talking about us being in what's called a hard market. And that is driven by natural disaster claims. So what's happening there is that the global insurance companies are seeing more and more of these natural disaster claims really across the world. And unfortunately, that's causing them to deem municipalities is more risky of a client. So many municipalities, especially in Canada, but definitely across the world, are seeing increases there. Now we're also seeing a 45% increase to transit premiums. Now, you won't actually see those numbers in my budget. Those numbers would show up in Mr. DeHaan's budget. But when we look at the insurance portfolio in totality, that part's important. So again, similar to what we see with natural disaster claims, we're seeing some effects from other municipalities in this particular case when it comes to transit. So for example, you may recall there's been some very unfortunate but very large claims and accidents in Ottawa fairly recently. And again, that's causing the insurers to take a harder look at municipalities and deem us to be more risky in terms of transit. So with those things combined, we're seeing an overall increase of 14% in our insurance portfolio. So you'll see 10% of that in my budget, and the other piece will show through the transit. Now, as I mentioned, municipalities across the province are seeing major increases. And speaking with my colleagues, it actually sounds like Woodstock is very much on the lower end of the increase. So although I'm not exactly happy with a 14% increase, many municipalities, including some of our colleagues and lower tiers here in Oxford County, are seeing increases as high as 30 to 40%. Now, one more note on the insurance budget is that we do, and you'll notice this in the actuals versus the budgeted, we do always allow for a little bit of room in the budget for additional coverage requests. So things like new property, new equipment. For example, Council has recently authorized the purchase of the property directly west of City Hall. So now as that comes into city ownership, we will need to add that to the insurance portfolio. So we do experience some additional costs as the year goes on. So we always budget a little bit of extra to accommodate for that. Now, the second piece about the expenditures is the City Hall part-time wages. So you will see almost a 50% increase in this wage line, and that is entirely due to COVID. So it's a twofold increase. The first is additional custodial hours to sanitize the touch points in City Hall every day or twice per day. It is a requirement when reopening to sanitize regularly, and it's also part of our safety plan and our reopening plan for City Hall. So we need some additional custodial hours to help us with that. Any councillors who have been able to get to City Hall recently, you'll notice that we do have a temporary patron control screener at the door. And that's a position that's been created and will remain in place until restrictions are lifted. So that person needs to screen everyone coming into the building. And also because of the way that City Hall is set up, we need to make sure that we control how many people are in the building at a time so that we can meet those mandatory physical distancing requirements. So really what we're seeing in our increase in the clerk's department is almost entirely due to that insurance piece as well as the COVID wages. So we are looking at a 7% increase, and it is strictly almost entirely based on those two budget lines. So last but not least, this is in addition to the base budget. It is something we brought forward to Council last year as well, but as we know, all of the additions to the base budget were put aside last year. So we are respectfully asking Council to consider this again for the Clerk's Department for 2021. It is an agenda management software. It's a $14,000 implementation cost, and that includes the initial setup as well as training and the training fees, and then a $10,000 per year licensing fee thereafter. So as the city grows and our department's volume of work is growing with it, our department is really trying to look to better utilize technology to create efficiencies and try to drive that workload capacity into the department without necessarily having to increase our staffing levels. So an agenda management software allows us to improve efficiencies around not only the agenda preparation, but minute taking and the behind the scenes work that we do following the council meetings as well. So it can streamline and automate many aspects of that preparation, minute taking, and post-meeting activity processes. But not only will staff time be saved when we're creating, updating, and distributing meeting information, but the accessibility of the agendas would be improved. And councillors would also be able to be provided with a secure portal for accessing closed agendas, so rather than receiving those paper copies only. Agenda management software is widely used by many municipalities and public sector organizations across the province, including many right here in Oxford County. And my colleagues and fellow clerks speak very highly of the agenda management software. So again, we would respectfully ask for Council's consideration of that. And with that, Your Worship, that is the extent of my presentation.
Thank you. Questions of Council? Well, very good job. Thank you.
Okay.
And our next up is Economic Development, and we have Len Magyar with us, and this is pages 82 to 83. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I've got a small presentation I'm going to try and share. I've been a little nervous about the technology, so hopefully this will all work. So in terms of the Economic Development Department, 2020, in spite of COVID, was still an exceptionally busy year for us. We still had numerous inquiries, which just continues to rise, pretty much every week in terms of new investment inquiries. And of course, we work with existing businesses to ensure that they stay in the community, they expand. So that's largely business attraction, business retention. And the interesting thing about business attraction is when we land a new company, once they're here, then that becomes part of the business retention portfolio of what we do. We're involved with external marketing of the municipality. So it's not so much marketing within Woodstock, it's marketing to the world. And some of our major markets obviously are Japan, where we have been lucky enough to attract a lot of investment from. Europe and also the United States are our predominant markets. We're involved with municipal industrial land sales. The CIP program is administered through our department. And I must say that a lot of the credit for that actually should go to Brad Hammond, who's the development officer for our department. That's a project which he's taken on and he manages quite well. We get involved with various downtown development projects, and the Small Business Enterprise Center reports through to our office as well as the physician recruiter. And both those individuals are going to be speaking after me. So I won't talk a lot specifically about what they're doing. In terms of the office, this kind of gives again kind of a Cole's notes of kind of our structure. So I talked about a little bit about investment attraction, and you can see some of the things we do there. 2020 really impacted our budget in terms of our activities. In 2021, you'll see there's later on there's a number of decreases in various budget lines, and a lot of that's related to the fact that we typically do trade shows, we travel, we get involved with missions. Pretty much all of that stuff is gone for 2021. There's some slight hope that maybe late in the year there might be some opportunities, but the budget really reflects the fact that we're not going to be doing a lot of that stuff. The business retention I mentioned, working with existing companies and continuing to be on their radar when they actually do need assistance from the city. The small business assistance, again, I won't talk about too much because Ramona will handle that part. And then the other stuff, which is pretty much anything kind of related to real estate, seems to fall into our department. So we get involved with leasing city properties, purchases of properties in the downtown as well. So it's pretty varied in terms of real estate. In our business, we, like a lot of smaller municipalities, we always quite often will say we don't have enough dollars to do all the things that we want to do. So as a result, economic development's been pretty innovative in that we partner with a lot of groups so that we can spread our message a lot further. And the beauty of this is that obviously we can spread our dollar much further. And it also allows us to really kind of decide specifically which shows we want to go to. So for instance, the two partnerships that we predominantly are involved with is Oxford Connection, which is development offices across Oxford County, but also our SOMA partnership, which involves 5 other municipalities across kind of Southwestern Ontario. And the beauty of relationships like that is if there's a trade show that we're doing somewhere else, the development officer and myself don't necessarily have to travel to those shows, but all the leads are shared amongst the group. So we share the costs, and of course we share the workload. So that certainly is one of the advantages. Down in the corner, I talk about the fact that wasn't last year, but in a typical year, we quite often would go to about 17 trade events. The trade events would generally generate for us about 400 contacts or leads. And through all of our partnerships, we're able to access about $700,000 in marketing. So specifically for SOMA, it's a $30,000 annual fee. It's been the same fee for about 15 years. And through the partnerships that we're involved with, we're able to access about $700,000 in marketing. So some of our goals, some of the things that we did in 2020, again, it largely revolves around working with existing businesses and again, ensuring that they expand in our community. So we've worked with companies when they need to buy land to expand, when they have issues with zoning, variances, that sort of thing. We would quite often will provide advice. As I mentioned, we didn't do a lot of trade shows in 2020, so really the only event we went to was the Site Selectors Guild, which was in Atlanta in March of last year. And we got out of March, actually, literally pretty much just before they started shutting everything down. So we flew out on a Thursday, and I think it was the Saturday when they started shutting down access to Canada from the US. So we were fortunate that way. We attend various associations. So OMCA, Ontario Manufacturing Communities Alliance, which is through SOMA, chamber events, the Auto Mayors, that sort of thing. We also continue to maintain our relationship with the Japanese and German chambers of commerce. Our Japanese one is probably our most noted one. We are doing a little bit more with the American Canadian Chamber as well, because there are some opportunities there. And through our SOMA group, we actually submitted for some funding. And the government acronyms I'm never a big fan of. It's ICI. They've now changed the name again, but last year we were successful. SOMA was successful in terms of accessing some dollars from that. And I believe we have $40,000 that's coming to SOMA in the 2021 budget as well. As I mentioned, we heavily involved with the CIP program. And again, that's more so Brad Hammond, the ongoing physician recruitment program. And last year we were very successful in terms of land sales. That number is actually wrong. I think it's actually about $5.67 million in sales that we had, but for us, a very good year. We closed a total of about 36.8 acres. Again, a very good year in terms of sales. A lot of these sales were smaller in size, so 2 acres, 4 acres, that sort of thing. So we had some sales in Bishop Park. We're getting to the point where there's virtually nothing left in Bishop Park to sell. So it's a good news, bad news story. So when people contact us and they're looking for land, we don't have a lot of options to talk to them about. And then we did put in a road into what we call the Treemster Farm, and we sold a number of parcels along there. It was like somebody's set off a starter's pistol that we literally had like 6 sales in it seemed like a few months. So Woodstock Glass Tempering was one of them, Mirror Technology, 3 Wood Investments, and Navarro. So we've had a number of sales, and that's certainly in terms of small sales. Those are the ones that really give you a lot of diversification in your local economy. So we'd like to get those smaller companies, and of course they grow with the community. We find quite often they're very committed to the community, very community oriented. So quite often they give back a lot to the community through sponsorship of hospitals, that sort of thing, sponsorship of sporting events, that sort of thing. So they put a lot of money back into the community. We've had some other land sales throughout the city as well. Again, not your typical users, but we had some dealings with the school board, and we sold 97 Mill Street. That deal is supposed to close a little bit later this year. And one of the big things we had to move on fairly quickly because of the COVID situation was the pop-up patio program, and that was pretty successful. And of course, it's going to be supported again through 2021. So 2021, it's going to be a lot of continuing to work with existing companies. We're going to continue with our partnerships, obviously, because we see a lot of value in that. We receive $50,000 a year from the county for our Oxford Connection group, which is, again, the development officers across the county. And it's typically for trade shows or events that we do within Ontario. So it's not really meant for kind of foreign external. That's more the SOMA purview. But those dollars have flowed, and we've been fortunate. We just actually completed an event, virtual job fair, which was more of a retention thing for our existing companies, because we get a lot of complaints that people are having a tough time, employers are having a difficult time finding employees. So it went fairly well. In fact, the stats just came in today, and so we have to go through that and see whether it's something we continue to do in the future. One of the things that's going to be a real highlight for our office this year is the LEA farm will come to market, and just based on the level of interest we've got right now, we'll probably be fairly easy for us to sell a minimum of 50 acres. I think the last numbers we looked at, that Brad and I looked at, was probably closer to 65, but we're being conservative and saying 50. Of course, we bought the Corlett farm at Highway 2 and 401. We're working through all the servicing design required for that, so that will come to market probably in about 4 to 5 years. It's a little complicated in terms of getting servicing under the 401, but technically achievable, but again, it takes time. We're going to continue getting the old golf course property ready on Juliana Drive, and we've actually already had some interest in that with as we're moving through that process. And we're going to continue to lease various properties as we go along. We have a few properties that have come back into the city that were always owned by the city, but where we've lost our tenants. So now we're going to be looking to refill that space. And we're going to be looking to acquire additional land if we get the blessing of council. So in terms of the budget, I mentioned land sales. And as you can see, the land sales for this year are projected to be way up in comparison to what I had budgeted last year, not compared to what we did, but compared to what I budgeted. And we're projecting about $7 million in sales. So when this was prepared, that seemed like a reasonable number. But again, based on some of the previous discussions that I mentioned with other clients, with the order book that we've got, we're probably looking somewhere between $14 and $16 million in sales for this year. In terms of other items, we have an increase in our costs related to land sales, so that's under expenditures. And that largely comes from the fact that as we sell land, many cases we have to pay a commission. So of course, as the LEA farm comes on, that will probably necessitate us paying out more commissions. So that largely is in and out item, because as we sell land, a portion of it goes out for commission. The items on this slide are basically mileage, conferences, and meetings and luncheons. And of course, because of COVID, we're not going to be doing near as much of that. So all those specific line items are all going down. The other area that I should talk about is the 0348 account, which is our trade shows and travel. So that's related to largely Oxford connection related events. We're decreasing that as well. And, or sorry, that's the 0368 account, sorry. And the 0369 account, which is travel attributed to SOMA, we're pushing that down as well, again, because we don't foresee doing a lot of that travel this year. This just kind of gives you an idea of some of the development activity we've experienced in the community. So it gives you a 5-year snapshot of land sales. So as you can see, 2020 was a very good year for us. And it gives you an idea of the land sales in terms of dollar value. That's the blue bars. And then the green is the number of acres that are sold. Industrial permits, again, is something we like to look at as a measurement. And as council is aware, in all of our land sales, we have a requirement that people build a building within 2 years of the date of closing. And so that plays itself out in the industrial permits. And the next chart on square footage just gives you an idea of the amount of square footage that the permits have actually been issued for. So that, generally on an uptrend, but we suspect in the next year or two on the industrial side, as we sell the LEA farm, that we'll start to see a lot more construction activity, both in permits and square footage. So that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions of council? Councillor Accioni.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just through to Mr. Magyar. Of course, just want to say a great job. I know it's been such a challenging year. Those stats are really interesting to see and kind of excited to move forward with land sales and everything. But just off the top of your head, how many acres right now are approximately left for sale? I know it's getting pretty dire, but do you know offhand how much are acres ready?
Your worship, through the question, in terms of what the city owns, excluding the Allier Farm, I think we have about 16 acres that we ourselves own. And we do have some interest in a couple of those properties. So hopefully in the next few months, we'll be bringing offers for it on those. In terms of private sector lands, there really aren't a huge number of properties that are available. So that's one of the challenges our department has, is we don't, particularly when it comes to larger properties, in fact, even smaller properties, but larger opportunities, we really have nothing to compete or even put proposals in many cases, because we don't have those private sector options. There's certainly a lot of people who are looking at the Woodstock market for opportunity or future investment, but there's not a lot of private sector land that's actually available.
Okay, again, thank you both to the entire team, actually.
Thank you, Councillor Schattenberg.
Thanks, from the mayor to Len Magyar as well, Development Office. I guess my first question would be is, in the past, I know the city has gained some revenue from renting out industrial land that is not serviced yet and not sold yet, obviously. Is there still some potential for revenues from any of these lands as far as agricultural side of things go?
Your worship, through the question, yeah, you're right. We typically, when we're bringing land to market, so quite often when we buy land, we have to do a number of studies and that sort of thing. So even though we buy it, quite often does not come to market, say for 2 or 3 years, and we will put it out for bid for farmers to bid on. It also helps us because it keeps activity on the farm and on the property, helps keep some weeds, and of course generates some revenue. And it's interesting in terms of the ag community. We do get some criticism that we're converting agricultural lands to industrial, but we also do get a lot of accolades that we're at least maximizing the opportunity for people to use it for agricultural until it's ready. So you kind of get both sides.
Follow-up is more of just a marketing question. Lennon, we talked a little bit earlier today about come to the crossroads.com website. I noticed last year the budget was $5,000 and you spent over $7,000 on the website, or at least what I'm assuming is the website maintenance. But the budget for this year is only $3,000. Is there a reason for spending less this year on the come to the crossroads site?
Your worship, through to Councillor Schattenberg, basically what's happened is we brought the website under the city's domain now. I may not be saying this right because of as you know, I'm not that great at technology, but and the majority of the site is actually done. I know that my assistant is working on a few kind of last pieces, so that's why the number's down.
Thank you. Councillor Talbot.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Len. Just a small question regarding the physician recruitment. I mean, normally Chrissy would have been going off to career fairs and flying the city banner, and that. Are things being done virtually, or how are we, or how is the market like in order to attract? And I mean, there's always students that are graduating that are looking. So how are we managing that whole process?
Your worship, through to Councillor Talbot, there certainly has been a bit of a change, and as I say, I don't want to steal a lot of Christie's thunder. I actually see her on there, so she might want to answer this question. But we are definitely changing some things we're doing, because you're right, some of those in-person events we have to do a little bit differently. But Christy can, I'm sure, give you more detail.
Thank you. We could wait, and we'll do that when we get to that section. Right now, I just want to see if there's any further questions here on economic development. Seeing none, looks like we have Ms. Gallagher on as well right now, so she's up next, the Small Business Center, and that's pages 85 to 87. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, councillors and esteemed guests. I'm just going to share my presentation here for you. So 2021 has been 2020 was a very interesting year for us at the Small Business Center in terms of being deemed an essential service. So just to have an idea of what the center really focuses on, our center is designed to focus on businesses, startup businesses, and expansion businesses that are typically less than 5 years in operation and have under 10 employees. So the core of the services that we provide are advisory services, which we call consultations, professional referrals to professionals, accounting, finance, HR, mentoring and networking, workshops and seminars, and partnership development is a really key part of it. 2020, we had some great achievements. Overall, we saw a 36% growth in the services that we provided during a global pandemic with major lockdowns. So in terms of consultations, we were averaging over 400 consultations for the year. And these are 1 hour segments. So 1 hour meetings with first-time clients and repeat clients. We actually did have the opportunity to go out and visit 255 businesses and conduct 29 workshops and seminars. And the reason that our workshop and seminar numbers are a little bit down is because of the fact that we switched to a virtual platform. So we moved a lot of the stuff that we would have done live into on-demand webinar. And so while we were still doing the exact same number, they don't necessarily reflect the same way. From that, we look at what was the net impact or the economic impact from the Small Business Center to the community at large. In 2020, we assisted in 79 business starts, 47 of those in Woodstock. We assisted in 17 business expansions, 17 specifically in Woodstock, and created 127 jobs during a COVID pandemic. And that was 80 jobs that we created in the Woodstock area. Now, because of the pandemic, one of the other interesting things is that we didn't do necessarily the follow-up that we generally do with businesses because we were so busy dealing with issues that were coming up with people because of the pandemic that we may see that our 2021 numbers may increase as a result of not being captured in 2020, the actual reality of what our impact was. And the really interesting thing with this is the fact that for every business we create at a small business level, 67 cents of every dollar that they earn actually stays in the community. So this has a great economic impact for the community. In terms of the office, we really focused last year on really working on our partnerships and opportunities that we could participate in. The center has become part of a network, the Small Business Centers Network. We are looking at that being an ongoing type membership based, bringing together all the small business centers to work together as opposed to being standalone. We participated in the Digital Main Street program again this year. So we worked with our 4 BIA locations and with rural Oxford in order to work with Main Street businesses to help them with their digital marketing. To that effect, we also partnered with Tech Alliance, who dealt more with on the Digital Main Street program with some of our more established businesses. We were part of the Ontario Together program through the Ministry of Small Business, in part through the Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. And that's where the funding for our virtual business advisor is coming from. We launched a food business accelerator program for those people that were looking at establishing food-based businesses. And with the changes that occurred in terms of home-based baking, this was a really great opportunity. So we partnered with Food Venture Program out of the University of Guelph. We've also done some really great partnerships and are working with some new programming right now with the Workforce Planning and Development Board. We did a lot more outreach and collaboration with the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, the Central Ontario Regional Economic Development, And I am really happy to say that our office is part of a regional program that's being done with the Small Business Center in St. Thomas, London, and Windsor, Essex. And we are going to be piloting with the assistance of Libro a foodpreneur program. We're calling it Foodpreneur Advantage. So that hasn't officially been announced yet, but I just wanted to let you know that this is a program. It's going to be a 4-year program. We're going to be focusing on foodpreneurs and food production. And this has become really important in terms of where we sit as an organization, that these regional and provincial partnerships are allowing us to not only secure additional funding, but also put Oxford County on the map in terms of being very, very viable for small business throughout the region and throughout the province. We also work really hardly with our community partners here in the county. We work very closely with all 5 chambers of commerce, the 4 business improvement associations, Community Futures Oxford, Tourism Oxford, RODEC, and Community Employment Services. We also have partnered with Southwest Public Health, and they have created for us a series of videos on food production and how it relates. We have a very strong relationship with Oxford Connection, and not just because Len is my boss, but because of the fact that what we do really does have an impact for the economic development offices throughout the county. And the Woodstock Art Gallery and our office have partnered to create a new program for creatives. And so we are sort of talking about how creatives or artisans can work together and create the business model for their businesses. And that's been a really successful partnership that we have undertaken as well. So when you look at our revenues, 2020 to 2021, just some of the highlight things that I want to focus on from the budget. The City of Woodstock contribution to our total revenue is 27%, compared to 36% that is provided through the province, 15% by the county, and 23% by specialty grants and funding that I am constantly working on in order to get this additional funding. And you're going to notice I have entered in the $32,000 that we did receive as part of the COVID-19 Recovery Network for a virtual business advisor for an 8-month contract. I've separated out the grant funds from the actual revenue because grant is basically an in-out, so I wanted to have a more accurate reflection. The differences from the funding or the budgeted in 2020 to 2021 from the province of Ontario is a result of the realignment of deferred revenues. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the provincial year end is March 31st. So I really do appreciate the assistance of the Treasury. They help me out every year because it's so crazy in terms of trying to figure out how much revenue is deferred from our calendar year to the provincial fiscal year. This new contract also had a 10% holdback that is not going to be seen until April 2022. And so that did have an impact on the numbers that I had projected. And then the grant funds, I say, reflect money that's in and out and dispersed. So when you look at 2020 to 2021, it is not an increase of 100,000 from the 93,000. It's a carryover because of the way that the funding goes. So it's not net new money. It's part of the budget that carries over specifically for the grant funding. When we look at our expense side, the salary between budget 2020 to current 2021. In 2020, I had budgeted for a part-time business advisor. That position was because of our ability to secure Digital Main Street funding. That funding ended up coming from that program. Building repair expenses and cleaning services have increased, or almost cleaning itself has doubled. Other expenses as a result of COVID-19 protocols. And we're finding some wear and tear in the current premises. So we've had to replace a water heater, toilets, things like that are general wear and tear in buildings given the age of the building. The reason that we are showing Digital Main Street in 2020 and 2021 is the Digital Main Street program had ended in 2020, and it was re-upped in August of 2020 again to call it the Digital Main Street 2.0. And so this is another program where the funding is deferred from, 2020 to 2021 because the program ends at the end of March of this year. One of the areas that when everybody looks at it, the Bridges to Better Business event, that revenue amount has increased, but our Bridges to Better Business is a self-funded and it is funded through sponsorship and ticket sales. And so our increase from 2020 to 2021 is a result of the speaker that we had chosen and the selected budget. But there will not be a budget impact if the event is not held, just given the circumstances with COVID-19. I have also now included the COVID-19 Recovery Network, the virtual business advisor that was not included because we've now officially signed the contract, and that contract goes until the end of September 2021. So one of the areas that's also, when you look at it, is our special events budget. And I just want to give you some highlights on where some of that money has been allocated in terms of what we have accomplished at the Small Business Center. So part of our budget in the special events had to do with 474 Dundas Street, or the Dairy Capital. And that was what was left over of the renovations and maintenance that we did to make that a space that we could use for our Christmas market in 2019 and to continue using it. The great thing was that while the Small Business Center did pay for the renovations, the city was able to use that space as a rental location. So I do feel that we've had a commitment to what's been going on in the city based on something that we've done. It also included the trial of a food business accelerator program where we did put 12 businesses or 12 participants through that program, through the food venture program. We sponsored a women's wellness conference. So generally as part of our mandate, we will do a women's event. Last year we decided to do the women's wellness conference. We partnered with Rural Economic Development, Tourism Oxford, Community Futures to create a We Grow Together video series. That was launched and presented over the course of 2020. We also had to take a very hard look at the way that we do our operations at the Small Business Center. And with the pandemic and us having to move to a virtual platform, we have converted everything to a CRM and management suite called Zoho One. And so that conversion has taken place so that we can be more effective, more efficient, and integrate a lot of our processes that we have in the office into one suite. And we did that in connection with the IT department. Chris Gratton had looked at it and made sure that it would meet all the city protocols. We ourselves created an SBC Live video series. And so we are featuring different businesses with a message that other businesses can learn from. And we created, and I think the biggest and best thing, and I'm so very, very excited about it, and we just soft launched it last week, was the Engage Oxford website. And you see the pictures here. The first picture is an actual a listing, a business directory listing for a business, and then we have an events page. Everything is in here. The reason we are so excited about this website is the fact that it will allow any type of business, whether they're operating full-time, part-time, if they are a home-based business, if they have retail sales or online sales, any type of business that operates in the county, and if they sell to individuals or to other businesses, they can all provide all of their information on this website. It will allow people to search by the city. It will allow them to search by the industry, by the business name. It also has the ability to search by businesses that are near me. So if you happen to be in a location that you may not know what business is around you, you can click the Near Me button and it'll tell you exactly what's close by that you may want. It includes all the businesses' contact information, their social media, and if they have an e-commerce site, everything is here, and it will allow someone from this site to go to any one of those things. Reason that this was really important is during the pandemic, there were a number of initiatives that were undertaken, but they were very specific to retail businesses, and they had to sell retail. They had to do B2C, which was business to consumer. You couldn't be listed on any of these sites if you sold B2C. You couldn't be listed on this site if you had a home-based business. And so we were looking at something that wasn't just for COVID, but that could be something for a post-COVID world where we had everything together. And this is the same thing with the events page, that people can list directly. They can also update their listing, and it has a really, really great impact in terms of what we are doing. So 2021, our special events, we're going to continue the We Grow Together with our community partners. We are going to be continuing our SBC live video series, and we are really focused now on creating business accelerators for very specific purposes. We're looking at our current relationship with the Woodstock Art Gallery is for the arts. We are looking at very much focusing on the trades and working with workforce development to create that. We are going to be working with our business improvement areas to create one for retail, and we are continuing with our regional partners to focus on the food. So my biggest ask, given the volume of work and the impact that we are having in the community, right now we have currently 2 permanent full-time staff that are working in the office, and that's myself as the manager and our small business consultant. We really do feel that we have the need, based on the volume of work, that we do require a 3rd full-time person in the office. The work that we do is extremely specialized, and it requires a very unique skill set. And I know I will not insult Len by saying this, but Len and Brad could not do what we do. To give you an example of the depth and breadth of knowledge that each of us in the office needs to have. Today I had a phone call where the initial ask was, I need to hire someone. In that 5-minute conversation, it ended up being an hour, because from that 5-minute, I need to hire, I need to assess what industry they are in, where it is that their business is going to be operated. We ended up having to talk about payroll systems, industry regulations and requirements. I referred them to Woodstock to get their business permit and license. So thank you very much, Amy. We are working really hard to make sure that you are getting those business permits. We ended up having to talk about corporation versus partnerships. We talked about how do you write off HST, how do you write off expenses, and what's required for reporting, from just one very, very quick phone call. And by the way, he was a construction and trades person, so I also had to know about the College of Trades. And that's what we deal with on a daily basis. And so while we have had the ability for the last 2 years to have a contract person in there, our ability to continue to work and provide the level of service that we have been providing really does require the 3rd person. Now, that also encapsulates the fact that if we don't have that 3rd person and I have to keep continuing with contracts, I have to keep training people and working on getting them up to speed on our systems, and then training them on the knowledge that is very, very specialized. One of the other issues that's come up as a result, both permanent staff, we exceed our allowable overtime. We're carrying over vacation time because of the nature and the needs of the clients we serve. We're having to provide evening appointments or participate in after hours networking and partner development. Then as a result, it's a choice of, we either have to readjust our regular work hours, which leaves only one person in the office, or we have to accumulate this overtime. And we've had to carry over vacation and everything into 2021. When we talk about the current business advisor contract position, I am now at the point where we have rolled over a contract. It's almost been 2 years now. Discussions with human resources and my knowledge of human resources as well has identified that this is the timeline. 2 years is the point where you demonstrate that you really do have a full-time need for a position versus the continuation of a contract. And we really do believe that a 36% increase in services during a pandemic with lockdowns is a key indicator of ongoing need from the community for what it is that we do. To highlight that, some of the marketing materials that we created during the pandemic, they were shared close to 170,000 times across the country. And we ended up getting phone calls from across Canada based on the information that we were putting out for people who were looking at it and trying to get information. The next reason that I really do see the need for this position, in discussion with our regional advisor through the ministry who is responsible for the large portion of our funding, they have identified that our consults are very high for a community of our size, and higher than some aspects that are even larger than us in terms of the volume of work that we've been doing. Our inquiries are higher than most communities our size. And the key point is that the Woodstock aspect was a very poor performer. And as such, our programming and operational from the ministry was quite low as a result before I took over the office 2 years ago. And so we are still working on those traditional old numbers. And so based on our new numbers and what it is that we are showing, they are indicating that we should be receiving an increase in the number of grants that we have for Starter Company Plus, in our summer company grants, and our overall core funding. But this won't come into effect, or we won't be able to negotiate this until the beginning of 2022, as our current contract is ending in March 2022. The final thing that we have identified is that in a review of 3 other aspects that are geographically close to us, relatively the same size, shows that we have fewer grants and reduced core funding, but have delivered or exceeded their numbers with respect to businesses started, jobs created, and the number of consultations conducted. So for me, this is a really important, just from a management and volume of business, this is a very key consideration for us right now. And I really worry about having to chase contract and continuing to do this on a contractual basis really does impact the operation of the office, and trying to decide what do we cut out for businesses that really need our services now more than ever in a post-COVID world. So that is my presentation for today, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Questions of council? Councillor Accioni.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Ms. Gallagher. Thanks for your presentation, of course. I know there's a lot going on. I guess I have a bunch of questions, and because I'm going first, I'm going to ask a few different things, and I might add on if that's okay with Worship. First off, I'm not the greatest at these, I'll certainly admit, but if I'm reading this right, you're asking for a 17.75% increase overall, and then as well as hiring a third person on top of that increase. Am I reading this right?
Sorry, through Your Worship, through to Council. Councillor, do you want to ask all the questions, or would you rather me answer them one at a time?
Just start with that. I want to make sure I am understanding this correctly. If that's okay.
So through Your Worship, through to Councillor Accioni. Yes, we are. And part of that is the fact that this year, the other money that wasn't recognized was the $32,000 through the COVID-19 Recovery Network. Part of this is salary based. It's also some of the impacts that we had through COVID, having to increase our costs, is the reason for the increase.
Okay, if I can continue on with His Worship, if I can add to a couple of line items then, if I do have some questions on that. Starting with cleaning services, we understand, I mean, you're doubling the amount. That seems like a lot to be an increase, but the Bridges to Better Business, for example. So years, $10,000. Obviously last year we didn't spend it, but I'm curious why the $5,000 increase is something.
So through Your Worship, through to Councillor Accioni, as I had indicated in the presentation, it was the speaker that we had chosen right now that we have shortlisted. Anything that we do with Bridges to Better Business is 100% funded, so that it's sort of an in-out. That we have sponsorship and funding and ticket sales that are based on that. So if we don't run the event, that will definitely come off the budget as it did last year.
Same idea. Okay.
Same idea.
As well, so I'm going to go to the full-time salaries. So you're asking for a $3,580 increase. That is just between the staff members now then? That's nothing, not adding any.
That's just strictly between the staff members now. That is all, like, so that
increases.
difference. Yeah.
Okay, because you're just talking about all the overtime you did, but I noticed you only got $164 for overtime in here.
That was not related to us. So overtime is taken as vacation in lieu or time in lieu, so it's not paid out. So it has to be taken as time in lieu, which means that someone needs to be away from the office in order to use up their overtime. So that was directly related to, at that point in time, there was our contract person had been listed in that area as part of the budget, and then we moved them over to the digital Main Street. So if my understanding is with that overtime, and I'm just going to double check that.
Line item 010.
Yeah, I am just showing through that it's just coming in as a item through the overtime, and I get the feeling that it was very much just in the transfer of moving the person to the digital Main Street, there was some overtime attached to that position.
Okay. And then if I can continue on with a couple of other spots here, your subscriptions, I mean, that's a sizable increase from 2,500 to 7,500.
Yes, so oh my goodness, subscriptions and advertising, those have flipped. Because of the fact that we've now gone with the Zoho one as being our marketing, we have gotten rid of a number of different things that would have been captured under advertising, like MailChimp and Zoom and all of those other things that would have been advertising related budgets. They have now flipped to a subscription base because I have this subscription with this new provider. So we are not relying as heavily on our outside advertising sources as we have in the past.
Okay, so with Zoho, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought there was going to be some significant, I believe the word was cost savings, but we're just flipping it to another area then.
Yeah, no, it's not cost savings, Counselor, it's actually time savings. So we have now freed up our time to actually have the ability to meet with clients. Like when you look at the actual time it takes for us to do a consultation, and the paperwork that's involved, like we've had to automate our booking system so that we don't have to have a person answering the telephones and booking. So it's allowing that to be automated without our physical intervention. So it's going to allow us to be able to reduce the amount of time that we are spending on things that are I'm going to call them non-revenue generating, but from this perspective of the business who is calling us for assistance. We could spend more time assisting them than doing paperwork.
Yeah, it certainly makes a bit more sense. Yeah, okay. And last question is, I haven't seen any of these SBC live videos. Where are those going
So
out?
right now, because of COVID, we had to hold off on some of them. They are now being posted on our Engage Oxford site. And we're trying to get them there. We're trying to get them into our social media. Right now, we've had to spend some time making everything AODA compliant. So I've been working on making sure that I have transcripts and things like that for some of them. So while they've been created, we've needed to make sure.
I just haven't seen any yet.
Yeah, no. And even with our Engage Oxford website right now, we have not done active marketing at this point because we've been testing it in a soft market to make sure that we can keep it consistent and that it can sort of self-populate itself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all those questions. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Further questions of council? Councillor Lauder.
Thank you. I just have one question through the mayor to Ramona. How much of your services would you say is county related? I know what you told us in the new business startup, but overall, how much is related to Oxford County?
So if you look at our actual physical work that we do, the consultations, the site visits and all that, less than 40% of it, I'm going to say 35 to 40% of it is county related. The majority of it right now is Woodstock based. What it is that we are doing. And part of that is the fact that people recognize us in Woodstock. We are a known entity in the Woodstock area. And so we tend to be the go-to. And we have a really great relationship right now as well. We've developed a great relationship with the clerk's office. So when the clerk's office gets an inquiry, they are sending it directly to us so that we make sure that we have that relationship with any small business that's starting out, that we both know what's going on. So 60% of our work is done in Woodstock County directly.
Thank you.
And I think one of the neat ways to look at that, just as clarification. So the County of Oxford grant is $50,000. When we take out all the revenues and against the expenditures, the request for 2021 is just under 89,000 from the city of Woodstock. Now, the $50,000 grant, of course, from the County of Oxford is also paid for by the citizens of Woodstock. So about 20,000 of that. So might be one of those things where next year we need to ask for a lot more money at the County of Oxford to try and get it in alignment with the service levels that your good office is doing. Councillor Schadenberg.
Yeah, thanks. Question from the mayor through to Ramona. I guess just a clarification, the provincial starter company grants appears to have 2 lines under revenues. I just want the clarification under the starter company plus grants from the province. You could describe why there's 2 different lines for that.
Oh, through your worship, through to Councillor Schadenberg, we have 2 different grant programs. One is Starter Company Plus, and that program is for anyone that's looking to start or expand a business. Okay, and it is a $5,000 grant. The second one is the Summer Company program, and that is very specific for youth between the ages of 15 to 29 who are looking to start a summer business. And so ideally, the Starter Company Plus, we have been assigned 9 grants per year for a total of 27 through to the end of the program. For the Summer Company program, we have 6 grants a year to help youth entrepreneurship.
Thanks.
Thank you. Further questions of council? I think I did see Councillor Talbot's hand up before, but that might have been answered along the way by Councillor Accioni's questions. All right, moving right. Thank you very much. Moving right along, we'll go on to Christy Hans, and we'll be looking at the physician recruitment program, and that is the detail is on page 83. Welcome. And you remember the question that we had before as well, I hope.
Yes.
Thank you.
So hopefully I'll touch on that while I'm presenting, and if not, I'm happy to answer it at the end. So I'm Christy Hans, your physician recruiter. So my objective is to recruit and retain family physicians so that all Woodstock residents have a family doctor. So here's my budget for 2021. You can see on the top line is my part-time contract, which remains the same as last year. The next 3 line items represent my recruitment activities, which I've summarized on the next slide. And then so the budget categories have not changed since last year, other than the addition of the moving allowance, which was approved last summer. So it's important to keep in mind that not all new physicians will be eligible for the moving allowance. For example, if they live in Kitchener or London, Waterloo, and they're going to commute to Woodstock to practice, then they would not be eligible. So to date, this incentive has not been given out at all. So overall, the budget is reduced by about 20,000 versus 2020. So here's a summary of some of my main recruitment activities. I probably don't need to read through them at all. They haven't changed overall. However, it is important to note that now a lot of these activities are being conducted virtually or online rather than in person. So a lot of the conferences and career fairs, not all of them, but quite a few have shifted gears, and they're now doing those for a presentation format online. Some of these activities have been done online all along, especially when I'm working with a physician who's maybe currently located in Saskatchewan or Manitoba or Nova Scotia. Even prior to the pandemic, I was doing a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of work through email, phone, and online with doctors who aren't nearby and want to hear more about Woodstock before they jump into relocating. So I'll give you a minute to read through those. I'll just point out to the last line here, the Casper conference. This usually comes up. Casper is not the friendly ghost in this case. Casper is the Canadian Association of Staff Physician Recruiters, which is an association I belong to that hosts an annual conference. So some of the projects I worked on in 2020 were the development of the physician recruitment website, which is almost complete, as well as creating other promotional materials and a question and answer document for new potential physician recruits. I also worked with the local doctors as well as Schulich or Western to increase the number of medical trainees we have in Woodstock. And I established the moving allowance for new physicians. Something else I worked on was trying to determine how many new physicians we actually require at this time. So in 2021, a lot of the things I'll be working on are extensions of the projects from last year. So I need to finalize the website content and upload it. I'd also like to develop some profiles of our local doctors that could be displayed on the website. I hope to establish a mentorship program for new physicians. The purpose for that is so that we can hopefully retain all of the physicians we do recruit. And I'd also like to go one step forward as far as forecasting how many new family physicians we will require in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years and beyond. So taking the number we need now and also factoring in our projected population growth and any future anticipated retirements. So this data is a couple years old now, but I put it in here to highlight that physician recruitment is important to Woodstock residents. So even those residents that currently have a family doctor, they may be concerned about what's going to happen down the road if their doctor retires or if they get sick. And they probably know someone, a friend or a family member that is looking for a family doctor. So results of the program to date, in 2019, for the first time in around 10 to 15 years, we did have 2 new practices open in Woodstock. Unfortunately, one of those physicians did not end up staying. In 2020, there were 2 family physicians who had planned to open practices. However, that did not end up happening as a result of the pandemic and delays with construction of clinic space. So one of those physicians, unfortunately, has since opened a practice elsewhere. The other one is still interested in starting in Woodstock. However, now due to her own personal reasons, she's unavailable until 2022. Earlier this year, at the start of the year, we did have 1 new family physician start a new practice in Woodstock, which was great. I'm happy to say that we should have another announcement of another new physician coming any day now, hoping to start within the next month or so. He has recently relocated from Manitoba, so he's here and ready to work, but he has a license in Manitoba and not a license in Ontario yet. So that paperwork is we're just waiting for that paperwork to come through. So in 2020, I generated inquiries from 39 family physicians. I was only able to attend 4 career fairs. This, of course, because the pandemic canceled many events before later in the year, in the fall. Many events did switch gears and go virtual. And then despite the pandemic, we still did have 12 family physicians come and visit us in person for a site visit in Woodstock. So challenges, these remain largely the same, the lack of available clinic space. We do have 2 construction projects currently underway, so hopefully that will help alleviate this issue down the road. Something else that myself and other recruiters are hearing from new graduates these days is that not as many of them, or not many of them at all, are interested in having their own family practice. Seems like more new grads want to either work in the hospital or maybe the COVID assessment center now, or they want to do telemedicine, or the other popular thing is to locum. And that means that they will fill in for another doctor who's on maternity leave or sick leave or vacation. Also, a physician that is interested in setting up a practice in Woodstock does not qualify for incentives from the province. So these grants range from $80,000 to $118,000. However, Woodstock is not deemed rural or remote enough for a physician to qualify. And then finally, it's probably not a surprise, there's intense competition from most communities. Everywhere is looking for doctors. And some of these communities are offering their own incentives, either on top of what the ministry provides in some cases, or in place of them. So I picked a couple of examples from close to home. In St. Thomas, they offer $33,000 as well as 6 months free rent. In Tillsonburg, $10,000 in moving expenses, $30,000 forgivable loan, 6 months accommodation, and 6 months clerical support. So these are just a couple of examples. I do know last fall we did lose one physician who was seriously considering Woodstock to the Quinte West Bellevue area, where they offer $100,000 in incentives. So it's something to keep in mind. I think Woodstock so far has been fairly conservative with just starting with a $5,000 moving allowance. But depending on how recruitment is going, it may be something we need to revisit in the future in order to be more competitive. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'm not sure if I answered all of the parts of the question from earlier, so feel free to ask again.
I see a head nodding. Questions of council? Councillor Lauder.
Yes, through to the speaker. Could you just tell me, you had mentioned about the doctors that we presently require. Do you have any idea how many?
So my best estimate based on the available data is at least 4. I would guess 4 to 6. The problem with the data that's available, I mean, it's always an estimate, but it shows me the best I can get is the number of people that are not currently attached to any doctor. So based on those numbers, I think we need 4 at least. However, it does not show me the people that are attached to a doctor in Mississauga or Milton that would gladly give up that doctor to have a doctor here. So when I look at the numbers for who does not have any doctor anywhere, it would be roughly 4. It does vary depending on, some new doctors might take 1,000 patients, some might take 2,000. So there's room for some error, but I would say at least 4. And then it's hard to quantify exactly how many have a doctor elsewhere, but would prefer to have a doctor in Woodstock. And sorry, when I say those numbers, those are specifically City of Woodstock numbers. If you then take into account patients that might travel in from Ingersoll or elsewhere, the number gets higher.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Talbot.
Thank you, Your Worship, through Christy. Just curious, what are we looking at as far as retirement of existing doctors? So, I mean, not only is what we need presently, but I'm sure in the next few years, we're going to see some retirements, or I'm just assuming, I'm not sure, but I don't know how many.
Yes, I have that down as a project for this year to try and quantify that more. And right now it's kind of my best guess based on basically age profiling. So I'd like to work more on that. And so last year it was what we need right now. And this year I'm hoping, depending on what people are willing to share with me, that I can get more of a handle on that. And also how much our population is growing will factor into that a lot, I'm sure.
Thank you. I have a question kind of along that same line. I guess it's actually maybe a bit more of a comment. I heard this in other communities. Some of the retiring physicians and doctors know how hard it is to do this attraction to the communities and how hard you have to work. And you pointed out to council some of the other communities that have a little bit more in the way of incentives. Wondering if it's possible to have communication with some of our existing physicians to remind them that the City of Woodstock issues charity tax receipts, and if they wanted to direct any funds towards the physician recruitment program so that additional enhancements could be offered. I'm sure that our council would be welcome to that, and our Director of Administrative Services would be able to set up a wonderful reserve fund so that you have additional funding from some of those physicians. I know many of them do already give back to many different charities within the community, but as they're looking to retire, they know how important it is to have somebody come in to take over for their practice. So just give you that as information.
Okay.
For further questions of council, Councillor Accioni.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Ms. Hans, thank you very much again for the presentation, and a few of my questions have been answered. But I'm curious on something, and maybe this is a council question just in general. If I know the challenge is my own family members don't have doctors. Trust me, I'm kind of getting tired of every single event or every time they seem to mention that to me. So I know the challenges you're having as well as the amount of residents. Is it possible, and I'm just throwing it out there, to come on a case-by-case basis if there's certain asks or something from doctors that might be interested in moving here? Is there ever a case where, you know, they've come to ask you something, would you be able to do this, or can you match this, or are those circumstances ever happening? And again, I hope I'm not speaking out of term here as far as council, but on a personal level, I'm curious, is that a decision that could be made on a case-by-case basis at all? Has that been thought of or discussed?
It's not common, but there have been occasions like that. And so far, we've just gone with, at first it was no incentives, and then now the moving allowance. So I haven't come forward with any one-offs like that, but it is something that I could keep in mind if council is open to that.
I certainly can't speak for everybody, and I haven't mentioned this to anybody, so I don't know what the response is, but I thought now's the opportunity. I certainly know it's a common complaint and comment from people and residents here in the city, and it's only getting worse. So I think we do have to, personally, I believe we should look at different options just to make sure we at least maintain our doctors. I'm seriously concerned about more retirements and us being even in a worse hole than we are already. So hopefully we can have those conversations going forward. So thank you for the job you're doing, and let's hope we get more here.
I should say thank you as well to the local doctors who have been a huge help. Absolutely. And donating their time, helping me out, taking time away from their day to meet with new doctors. So and some of them have even attended recruitment events with me on a Saturday, driving for a couple of hours. It's been really great.
Thank you. Further questions of council? Okay, seeing none. Keep up the good work, and we'll move right along. Our next area is the museum, and we have Karen Houston with us, and the detail is pages 68 through 70. Welcome.
Hello. Can you see me?
We sure can.
Okay. So basically, I just wanted to start with how we have actually met some of our strategic goals here at the museum, even in the middle of a pandemic. And we were actually able to finish some of the office spaces here in the basement before COVID hit. So that was through January through March. We actually changed that up. And basically now the entire building has been completed with how we want to use the space. Second, partway through the year, we came forward to hire a part-time custodian. You'll notice with the part-time wages, it looks like it's very low. We didn't have any summer students last year. Partly the custodian only started at the end part of the year, so that's partly why that is. The strategic plan, we talked about creating a Christmas, or talked about using the collection to actually engage the public. And so we used the Christmas cards in order to have a fundraiser. And you might notice with the different grants, there was one that says it's a federal grant and MAP. That's actually money that we were able to get through basically the feds because we had less funding. So this is a little confusing. Basically, all you need to know is that the offices before had very, very few walls. Now we have doors and walls. And so when I am actually doing meetings, I'm not interfering with everyone else. So we're very happy about that. Oh, our lovely, lovely Jersey. Okay, so basically this year, due to COVID, we had pretty close to the normal number of artifacts coming in, probably about 75%. Research inquiries, pretty similar. Most people are actually contacting us through email. What's interesting is how this jacket came to us. So this is obviously from someone who was on the team, 5253, and our communications person actually got us on a national story. It was called One Tank Trips. And so they had examples of one tank trips that you could take if you were in BC and Ontario, and they put them all together. So someone in Victoria saw that we had the Keeping Warm exhibit on and said, hey, Dad used to play on that team, put it in the mail and sent it to us. So it's bizarre how, you know, the actual engagement with the public makes a difference. So this portal on our website has had a huge increase because of COVID. People are at home. Over 31,000 people actually going to the museum's website and looking at the collection. Exhibits. Normally, we have them on site. Keeping Warm was started at the beginning of last year. It was supposed to be open for Family Day and was. And then we closed and we had to totally pivot in how we were actually going to do things. So with this, 19,000 people, over 19,000 people actually saw the virtual exhibits. Now, what's wonderful for me is that the granting agencies, they used to have a percentage if you had people who virtually saw your exhibits. Now it's 1 for 1. So those 19,000 people are actually counted as people who came through the museum. It started with, we had an exhibit that we'd already done for World War I and the rolling exhibits we had for that. And it was the last one where we talked about the Spanish flu. And so we thought, well, that's the last time a pandemic has happened. So that's when we started the COVID stories, which were a huge hit on social media, people explaining what they were up to and showing photos. And that has been a really, really wonderful project that we're doing with the Oxford Archives. Then there were a few others that we put in. And then at the end of the year, the Christmas card exhibit and the sales. Really, really wonderful. So historically, the visual or the virtual resources that you have at the museum would be the collection portal. Hello?
Many government, you know, it is meant to be totally private.
Hello?
Yep, not sure what that was, but go ahead. We hear you.
Sorry.
And there's the presentation. Very good.
Anyhow, I think I moved ahead, didn't mean to, but anyhow, yes. So our virtual resources, just to hit on those really quickly, 60% more than what we have had in the past, because everything now is, that's the way we're interacting with people. So we now have a YouTube channel. We just put something up this year for Heritage Week. We started with educational programs last year, Mayor for a Day, these sorts of things. Going on to fundraising events. What has been really good for us is that we do a lot of programming that is for smaller groups. So most of the escape rooms have 4 to 6 people in them. And so the numbers haven't been what they have been in the past. They're at about 60% of the spots are filled, but it still has gotten people engaged. It has gotten people to the museum. The cards were a wonderful hit. And now, I wanted to highlight this because I'm also in charge of the theater. And of course, because of COVID, they can't open. I know that they came to council quite early and basically stated until such time as they can go back to their regular numbers, they're going to continue to be out. We had planned a number of things in conjunction with them, and unfortunately that's ongoing. So this year, again, we're going to continue to do things virtually. We started in the fall, but it is coming into play now. We're going to have a new collection database. Hopefully the new one it will be cloud-based. And it will also make it a little easier for people to actually get what they're looking for. We were having some trouble people finding the actual information they were looking for. There is the Black History event that the Marshalls, wonderful collection of photos that we have from that family. In-house, we're now in red. We are open for the Heritage Architecture exhibit. We've also put up on our YouTube channel a couple of new virtual walkthroughs through the museum. And because we're doing the Heritage Architecture exhibit, we have basically we're going to be offering kits to kids where they get to create their own birdhouse. The idea is this is for their new spring break that's happening in April. They can go and really understand, how do you build a house? How does this happen? We're hoping to have a couple of new videos for the YouTube channel, one on basically helping them figure out how to construct it. And also we have drawings of this building. So we're going to try to create that in a birdhouse form so people can actually see what's involved. We've got heritage cookbooks, more walking tours coming up, and we're going to do another run of the Christmas cards. And that is it for me. I do want to point out that most areas that are dealing with programs in any shape or form, we used very little of the money last year because those events or programs did not occur. The amount of money that we programmed into them for this year is in the hopes that in October, November, December, maybe we can start running some of them. We are still planning on doing some of the escape rooms. So that is why some of that money is continuing to be there. That's it for me.
Thank you very much. And questions of council? Councillor Talbot.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Karen. Your subscriptions and memberships, you had budgeted 15, only spent 368, but this year you've done 2,000. Is that, is it
Your
more
Worship,
for membership?
Your Worship, through to the question. Basically, when I knew that this was happening, we had already paid, and we need to, for the OMA, the Ontario Museum Association, and the Museum Association. We canceled the newspaper, we canceled everything. So basically, this is going back and getting what we would normally have and saying, yes, we will continue. The extra money is actually part of the, it's hard to explain, but a subscription to a user group who uses the new database that we're getting. So that's on top.
Councillor Sandberg.
Yeah, through the mayor to Karen as well. I guess what's the general consensus as to the amount of space you currently have for archives, artifacts, and stuff like that, as far as being in storage, and you don't have to tell us where it's stored because that could be another scenario onto its own. But just give us an idea as to you say you keep receiving more and more artifacts all the time and donations.
Your Worship, through to the question. Yeah, it's a great question. We are running out of space. I've said it before and I will say it again. There are things I have turned down due to the fact that they take up more space than what we have. We at this point have now officially utilized the entire building in the most efficient way that we can think of doing. So most of what we are taking is smaller objects, paper, like photos, things of that nature. Yeah, it's absolutely true. There are things we turn down due to size, not because we're not interested.
Thank you. Further questions of council? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. And we'll continue right along. And we have quite a few sections to go over next. This is with Harold DeHaan, and we have the engineering department, the building department, bylaw, parking, transit, paratransit. And so that starts around page 29 and continues along. And welcome. I see your presentation. I don't hear you yet. Where are we?
Sorry,
Oh, there we go.
there we go. Sorry,
Well, welcome.
my apologies. Yeah, so I'm here to present the budget for the 2021 Office of the City Engineer budget. That includes the departments, as you mentioned, for building, engineering, bylaw, parking, transit, and paratransit. For building, 2020 year in review, we hired a second building technician. Council might remember we ended up coming to them in the middle of the year because we were getting swamped with volume. So construction value for the last year was 242 million compared to 233 million in 2019. It was construction of 522 residential units compared to 308 in 2019. So another record year for the city of Woodstock in terms of building. In 2021 objectives, we hope to continue to convert to electronic files, as well as investigate electronic permit application submission and plan reviews in order to streamline things and make it a little bit more efficient. Recently, we just had one building technician resign to move to another municipality. So we need to fill that vacancy also. Here are the numbers for the building department 2020 versus 2022. Permits, we're being conservative and planning on status quo there for zero change. Other revenues, which would be minor fines, minor fees, property clearances, contributions from the building reserve, et cetera. We're anticipating going from 6,000 to 24,000, so an $18,000 increase. Expenditures, 853,000 from last year, 871 this year, which is a 2.1% increase. As you may know, the building department has to be a zero net budget by law, so that's why the revenue is the same as the expenditures. This year, for additions to base budget, we are asking for an additional position of a deputy chief building official. This position would provide CBO coverage while the manager of facilities is absent while he's on vacation. He is the only one right now. The CBO, the manager of facilities, is the only one that can sign and approve building permits other than the CAO. So it becomes a little bit difficult when he's on vacation. This person would also help oversee capital projects in order to minimize carryovers, update and maintain policies and bylaws, and the estimated cost for the position is $125,000, including benefits. The other addition to base budget we're asking for in the building department is a position of a temporary full-time building inspector. This would be a qualified building inspector working full-time during the summer months, basically to help with the consistently high work volume that we have and cover the vacancies and vacations of the other regular permanent staff. Estimated cost for this position would be $45,000, including benefits. Engineering department, 303, year in review. We, even though it was approved the year before, we finally in 2020 hired an assistant management analyst, created a new cycle trail, completed the secondary plan for the Norwich Annex lands, and completed over $6 million of construction projects. Luckily enough, the department wasn't horribly impacted by COVID, considering since we were considered essential, so we were still able to get a fair bit accomplished. In 2021, objectives are to complete an EA for the Patulo Highway 59 intersection and servicing of the lands east of Toyota. Work with Treasury to continue the asset management plan development and improvements to meet provincial requirements, and continue EA and preliminary design. Oh, sorry, that's a repeat of the first bullet. My apologies. Notable changes in the budget. Council may remember, as well as approving a second building technician, Council also approved custodian partway through the summer, especially with the COVID and with the addition last year. So you'll see some of the wages went up to cover for that position. There's also an increase in the streetlight hydro to reflect historic levels. And there's a number of reductions in the COVID affected accounts, such as travel, things that because of COVID continuing, we probably won't spend as much. That being said, those accounts will probably, hopefully, will jump up again or go back to regular levels in the next year. So in terms of the numbers for 2020 to 2021, for engineering revenues, we're just anticipating a $1,000 increase from 485 to 486, so a 0.2% change. For expenditures, engineering expenses, which is the whole engineering department, 1,752,000 going to 1,796,000, or a $44,000 increase. That is mostly, as I mentioned, due to the part-time custodian and some adjustments we made to the vehicle expenses. Streetlights and traffic lights going from 682 to 762, or an $80,000 increase, which is about 12.6%. As I mentioned, that's for the hydro for the streetlights. And then the others, all the other miscellaneous, which is the methane gas collection system, rail maintenance, and a few other minor issues, is going from 83,000 to 85,000, or 2.4% increase. Total increase in the department is 6.1%. So basically going from just over 2 million to 2.1 million. The bylaw department, concerns and complaints, surprisingly enough, considering COVID and everything, really kind of maintained the same level as last year. 1,200 complaints received this year versus about 1,300 in 2019. Due to a variety of reasons, we were actually without a bylaw department for a few months. So that was, not fun, difficult. And we did hire a new, we're now back up to full steam, and we hired a new bylaw officer. Not an extra position, but a new person. Objectives for 2020 is to update the sign bylaw and the parks bylaw, as well as investigate administrative penalties to streamline appeals and guarantee payment. The numbers for bylaw, revenue, 6,000 last year. This year, we're only projecting about 2,000, so down 4, which is a drop of about 72%. Again, that's pretty much COVID related. Expenditures, 252,000 last year, 257 this year, an increase of 2.2%. Overall, increase to the bylaw department of 3.8%, or $9,000. The parking budget, 0307. Notable change in the budget was the parking enforcement wage. Some of it was moved from purchase services to wages. We are now paying, instead of paying a company, we're now paying a contract position directly. There's no contribution to the parking reserve this year. That was done to try to keep the numbers down. And again, this probably should be mentioned in all the budgets, that there's a reduction in certain accounts, and this one revenue definitely due to COVID. So for the actual numbers, revenue 2020 was 166. This year, we're only anticipating 116, or a drop of 30%. Administrative costs, 109,000 in 2020, 104 in 2021, dropping $6,000. And operations and expenses, going from 57,000 to 56,000. Overall expenses going up 1.2%. Oh, sorry, dropping 1.2%. But the net change is about $45,000. Additions to base budget for parking. Again, we didn't get around to it last year. This year, we'd like to look at equipment and software to modernize and consolidate the parking permit enforcement and administration of parking into one system. Consolidation in one system will minimize errors and reduce staff time. The estimated cost for this is $20,000. Moving on to transit, 2020 year in review. Transit was free during the height of the COVID season. However, also ended up going down to 1 hour long. Did about a month of 1 hour long cycles rather than half hour cycles. But other than that, transit did run all year round. 2021, we want to do some mandatory online training to increase safety talks with the drivers to improve service, improve advertising program to help increase revenues, and improve driver retention. Notable changes in the budget for transit are revenues cut to reflect the COVID ridership and the introduction of COVID funding to help offset COVID impacts. And here is a look at the numbers. As you can see for transit, 2020 we had 570,000 in revenue for fares. This year we're only anticipating 371, or a drop of 200,000, or 35%. Miscellaneous revenues of 632,000 in 2020, and 2021 we're anticipating 976. Most of that is from funding programs introduced by the provincial and federal governments to help municipalities deal with the COVID. So overall, the revenue ends up going from 1.2 million, just over 1.2 to 1.35 million, which is a 12% increase. In terms of expenses, I don't know what happened with the numbers there. Inadvertently deleted something. So I'll go to the book. My apologies. Transit, operations. Let's do admin first. Went from 2.3 million in 2020 to 2.4 million in 2021, and that is mostly due to, as Amy mentioned in her presentation, due to an increase in insurance premiums. And then the rest of the cost, so the total for transit total cost for transit last year was 3.135 million. This year it's going to be 3.283 million. So for on operations, so in administration we had the increase for insurance, and the big increase under operations was additional cost to clean the buses because of COVID. We have some extra manpower budgeted in to help with that. Additions to base budget for transit, a route expansion. Council may remember that we went to council last year, or well, I guess 2 years ago now, with a study, recommended some options. Council recommended or endorsed the 7th route 30-minute service option. This year, this is the addition to base budget this year is the introduction of that option. So it would be 7 routes with 30-minute service. The annual service hours increase $4,800. We would convert 2 part-time drivers to 1 full-time driver, relocate buses, shelters, print maps, etc. The new routes, all the routes will be completely redone. They'll be able to reach areas currently that aren't being serviced at all, the new residential growth areas in the city, as well as a couple of the commercial industrial areas that currently aren't being serviced, such as the Commercial Way and the Commerce Way Industrial Park and the Pattullo Industrial Park. And also it'll introduce multi or en route transfer points, so people won't have to go to the transfer terminal in order to transfer to another bus. So hopefully this will shorten and make the rides more efficient. The estimated cost for this option is $370,000 operating, as well as an additional $125,000 for capital. The only other way we could see if council did not want to, because of COVID and other considerations, did not want to implement that change right now, there is an option of extending Route 4 further east to service the new residential areas. This would add about 15 minutes to Route 4, which would put it on a 45-minute cycle, put it out of line with all the other routes. There'd be no additional operating costs, but like I said, that Route 4 would be servicing all the area on it less often than all the other routes. We would need about $20,000 for new signs and maps, etc. But I would just note that this would be a temporary solution. Eventually, the more permanent solution would have to go into place. Another addition to base budget for transit is to increase the fares from $250 to $275, and all the passes correspondingly also. The last increase was in 2016. This is a 10% increase. It kind of goes in line with the last increase, the study we did at that point in time, which kind of outlined the steps to hopefully, eventually. Right now, it's putting a plan into place to get up to $3. So this was hopefully bringing in an additional revenue of $25,000, but that is contingent. That's anticipating COVID, but nobody really, once you start talking about impacts of COVID, everything becomes a guessing game. Paratransit revenue, again, heavily impacted due to COVID. 130,000 last year in 2020, dropping to 90,000 this year. So a 30% drop. Operation costs are also dropping, though. We made a service delivery change. Went from 985 to 821, so dropping 16.7%. And basically that was done by basically having the whole service being performed by our contractor, instead of it being split between the contractor and city services. And administration costs staying the same. So the net cost for para last year we're running 882. This year proposed 761, or a drop of 13.7%. Notable change in the budget, as I mentioned, we now have the contract drivers driving 100% of the para buses, and the reduced fare due to COVID. Addition to base budget, we want to discontinue allowing paratransit users to use conventional transit for free. This is a policy. This policy does not meet AODA. It was a policy that was originally thrown in when we switched to the current system, and it's basically, some people are abusing it, and basically we think we're losing about $16,000 of lost revenue every year because of it. And that's about it. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions of council? Well, I think that's a lot to take in, and Councillor Talbot.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Harold. On page 30 in the engineering department, one of the things, the vehicle operating expenses, and this line's been coming up in almost every department that we're doing. So this is more looking for like you're looking forward to replacing, or you're planning ahead. Is that the same in your department, or?
30, you're talking
0345. It's the third line down on
right.
Page 30.
Yes. No. So yes, you're right. It went up 5,500. Yeah. Basically, we increased the annual per vehicle cost for all of our vehicles to match what they're costing historically.
Okay. And the data processing, is that cost gone up because of the movement toward a more electronic capture?
Well, it's that, and some licensing fees have gone up significantly with some of our software, and we're finding that with our GIS software, you buy the license based on number of assets in the system, and as the city grows, we're feeding more and more assets into that system, which is also causing an increase in cost.
Just going through my pages while you were talking about that, but I think that was all I had in all of those departments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schenberg.
Thanks from the mayor to Harold DeHaan as well. Without going through the specific calculations, We know that it's $2.50 to ride the bus once without going in the monthly passes and stuff like that. But give us an idea, generally based on total ridership versus total revenue, what the actual cost is to the city of Woodstock for one ride. I mean, it's already greatly subsidized, and if we go from $2.50 to $2.75 per ride, we're still subsidizing each ride.
Right. Yes. So we generally we have been hitting a ridership the last few years without looking at COVID. So let's say last year we had a $2 million budget, right? Just shy of, and we've been hitting ridership just shy of $500,000, say 450,000. So that puts each ride costing the city about $440. That's off the top, don't, give or take 20%. And people are paying $250 right now. Does that help? Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, thanks. And I guess as a follow-up quickly, if we extended to the 7th bus route, and this was discussed last year as well, would the city have to go out and physically buy another bus, or has that been available through funding and through gas tax, et cetera, et cetera?
Your worship, through the counselor, right now, we probably have enough. We have some extra buses. We always have extra buses because things break down, but it would be tight. But we also got approval from the government, was it last year now, for a number of improvements for the transit system. And one of those improvements was including the purchase of two more buses for the fleet.
Thank you. Further
thanks,
questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, and we'll move along. And next up, we have Taylor Crinklaw with our Public Works, and that begins at page 17, and he'll be going over Public Works, Waste, Sewer, and Water. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, Your Worship, and Council. Today I'll be going over the operational budget for the Public Works Department. Oh, okay, we'll do that. Okay. The Public Works Department is separated into 4 divisions, each providing operation and maintenance services for municipal infrastructure contained within the over 200 kilometers of city road in the city. The 4 divisions are the Public Works, Waste Management, Water, and Sanitary. The Public Works 300 accounts covers mainly our road maintenance activities, city services that function within the road corridor, and the associated overhead and administrative costs to operate such services. This year, there were some significant disruptions resulting from the pandemic. For the most part, we were able to adopt most of our services, albeit with some limitations or restrictions in place. This year, we also had first year of full enforcement of our snow and ice removal bylaw, and the Public Works had to adapt our routing and fleet accordingly to address how we address sidewalk snow clearing throughout the city. Some of the proposed 2021 initiatives I would like to highlight. I'm making a request for an additional skilled labor to be added to our complement. This year, we're also looking to remove the large sand sweepings pile located in our Public Works yard. As well, in 2020, there were some delayed operational contracts that we intend to resume. These contracts were put on hold due to the pandemic. In terms of our requests for the full-time skilled labor, currently the way the Enviro Depot works is we have a lead hand, 2 skilled laborers, and a clerk. The clerk is located out of the booth and addresses the vehicles and residents as they come in. This person is here for 8 months of the year, and for 4 months comes back to the main building where they help out with administrative and clerical duties for the Public Works Department. The main benefit for bringing in the clerk inside the office for the entire year is that this person will be able to help managing staff and conduct the substantial amount of clerical activities that is required to keep our regulatory obligations. The additional benefit is by having replacing a skilled labor at the depot with the clerk. So the skilled labor would be up there. Is that would actually help smooth out how the Enviro Depot operates, as then all the positions up there can be interchangeable because they're all skilled laborers. Not to mention that this skilled labor would provide a winter operator come winter season, and this would help our department achieve the road and sidewalk snow clearing targets that we're looking to obtain. When looking at the budget, we have a modest increase of 1.5%. The variations that you see in the budget is more or less just me realigning where I see funds being spent in the upcoming year. Waste. As the province applies its strategy for a waste-free Ontario, there's a lot of movement in how waste services will be provided in our future. My focus recently has been on the extended producer responsibility systems and how it focuses on a recycling collection system. This past year, the draft regulations provide some insight on how that might actually look, as well as the potential year that we'll see that transition happen. This year, we also saw the commodity prices for our recyclable material remain stagnantly low, and this doesn't help for the revenues that we've traditionally relied on in the past. This year, we also introduced the bulk EPS program to help divert styrofoam and such products away from the landfill, and that was fairly successful. If you look at the table below, you can see that there was an interesting year for our waste collection services. You can see the considerable jump in our garbage collection volumes while seeing a reduction in recycling, and we anticipate this is from the pandemic and associated impacts from that. You can also see there's a bit of a jump in our curbside bulk collection. Majority of the volumes that resulted in this jump is occurred in our spring cleanup event when the pandemic initially hit. All right. Proposed 2021 initiatives. With the finalized EPR regulations being anticipated shortly, would provide some guidance and would allow us to make some concrete decisions on how we can see our waste services being provided in the future. This year, the 2021 Census will be coming out, which will help provide an accurate depiction of our population. This is important as it will significantly influence our future organic collection requirements that are outlined through the food and organic waste policy. In order to accommodate our ever-growing growth, our garbage and collection routes will be reviewed this year, and we anticipate some adjustments will be required next year accordingly. The one recommendation that I'm making for a service change is the removal of one cycle of the bulk item pickup. Due to the timelines for the waste calendar, I will actually be bringing this to Council on March 4th. In terms of expenses, there's a modest increase of 2.9%. Once again, as you can see, the prices of our commodities is much lower than what we've seen in the past, impacting our revenue stream. Sanitary. Our sanitary collection operation maintenance services remain relatively status quo for this year. In essence, as sanitary blockages happen, we cleared up the problem largely either through our flushing programs or conducting spot repairs. The one thing to note for the upcoming 2021 is we're in discussions with the county on renewing the water and wastewater agreement. And this is the budget for the sanitary system in the upcoming year. Water is also a relatively status quo year, with the exception of the adjustments our staff had to make to account for the pandemic and how they do their services and entering residential homes and that kind of thing. The one thing I would like to highlight is when we looked at the county's user rate review this past fall, it came to light that our department provides high quality and cost-effective services. which I'd like to continue in the future. As for the water budget, once again, a modest increase of 2.1%. The most largest factor for this increase this year is actually at the request of the county, as they would like us to increase the commercial water meter replacements. Objectives for 2021. We continue to define, measure, and evaluate our services as we aim to provide a cost-effective and high-quality services. Continue to improve our records retention and documentation. We've taken some steps to acquire some software to help us seek efficiencies in how we operate. Stay ahead of compliance and regulatory changes. Continue to improve health and safety of both public and staff work environments, and enhance public communication. And with this, I would like to thank our communications team, Brad Jansen, Jeff Charlebois, and Spencer Holman, along with What's on Woodstock, for helping the Public Works Department get our message out there. Questions?
Thank you. Questions of council? Councillor Talbot?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Taylor. Can you tell me, it's on page 18, your public works, your office supplies went from 1,800 and it was almost 4,700 for year to date, and you've only got it down, or you're only projecting in 2021, 2,200.
Right, through your worship, to the council's question. Some of these items include the items we've addressed the COVID situation that's ongoing. So there, some of the masks and some of the wipes that we purchased initially were addressed to this account. Not to mention the department's new, so we're trying to still figure out what is appropriate, and I think that that jump is a one-off.
Okay, thank you. Cute family.
Oh, am I still sharing?
Yep.
Where are we? How do I get out of this? Terrible.
Thank you. Further questions of council? Councillor Accioni?
I can't see.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, cute family, definitely. Tyler, while you're trying to figure that out, I actually had a visit today from a resident that's been following along and watching last week's, and they've been waiting to watch your discussion. And of course, it boils down to sidewalk snow removal. So was asked, of course, if we could look at purchasing more sidewalks and what the cost would be for sidewalk snow removal machines, and have we discussed that? And I did promise I would bring that up tonight. So is there a plan? What's the plan to address sidewalk snow removal moving forward? Had a good discussion with him. He understands that residences and everything have to do in front of their own home as per our request, but his points where a few of our city parks and everything else, people are supposed to be staying apart, but they're out walking, and what we can do to the best of our abilities, and just kind of, if you don't mind adding some input to that.
Sure, we'd love to. Through your worship, to Councillor Accioni's question. This has definitely been a trial year for us to see how we can best manage the fleet that we have and the operators we have, and how we respond to a winter event. The focus that we've put out there is there's a lot of narrow streets in the city of Woodstock. I think 42% of the streets have curb face sidewalk, which is where the sidewalk abuts the road. And inadvertently, our plows will push snow up onto the sidewalk. So we've tried a different approach this year in many of those neighborhoods by actually having the plow remain a bit further away from the sidewalk. And this allows us not to push snow up onto the sidewalk, frustrating residents of the sidewalk they just cleared. So that was our goal in many areas, and it was definitely a work to train our staff to kind of get into that habit. The focus for us setting out our sidewalk plows to this date has been addressing the areas where we were unable to maintain that level of service. So effectively, where we've pushed snow back on the sidewalk, that's where we send our crews out after we've done all our own city-owned property snow removal. In the upcoming year, if this request gets approved, It will definitely help put more resources out to doing sidewalk clearance. It would effectively allow our response to be quicker for when we get out there with our fleet.
Thank you.
Councillor Schadenberg.
Yeah, through to Taylor, the sale of rain barrels and recycling bins and stuff like that, that's really just cost recovery for your department, what you're paying to pick them up and what you're selling them out the door for. Is that true?
Through your worship, to Councillor Schadenberg. For the most part, I think there's a slight loss involved in there, but really it's a wash. I guess the one thing I'll add is necessarily the revenue we get from those purchases that residents make don't necessarily reflect the year that we actually purchase them from the supplier.
Thank you. Councillor Talbot.
Sorry, Taylor, I had one more question. It was on 37. It was water meters. Our commercial contracts, maybe I missed this. I had to leave the room for a second. We budgeted 10 this year. We did almost 14,000. But next year, you got it up to 35,000. I just wondered, is that due to new installations or just the development?
Through your worship, to the Councillor Talbot's question, you walked out at the perfect timing. So the county this year has requested that we upsize our program for commercial water meters replacement, and that's to reflect their request. So it's that time of year they want to replace a large chunk of what's in.
I should have known I'd leave the room at the wrong time, but I was necessary.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Well, thank you very much. And last section for tonight for the special budget meeting is the mayor and council section. And so that is, let's see, page 99 is where we begin. And what we have right now on the council section, I've reduced the publicity and promotion area by half. So a $5,000 decrease there. And that's for a lot of the community events that would normally take place, and council is represented at those events. So again, seeing that we may not be able to be out and about as much as in a normal year. Now, what we were able to do last year, as you'll see in the forecast for the year to date, there were some funds spent there, a little under half of the budget amount. Some of those organizations we were able to still contribute in other meaningful ways. And a good example would be with the help from our special events and a local business. So the Remembrance Day service. So Jason Erb of Erb Signs produced that large banner for the veterans to hold their indoor ceremony, all physically distanced, etc. And when the Legion asked on reimbursement, of course, he made that as a donation. Now, a lot of work goes into planning events like that. So on behalf of council, we were able to help give a little extra to that Poppy Fund, and they'll be able to keep that banner for many years to come on display. Now, within each of our individual budgets, we have allotted each year $2,000 for conference and seminars, and not that it would all be used in any one given year, but if there's certain years where you want to go to a conference, you could use funds from multiple years. Now, we've reduced that across the board by $1,000 for each counselor, and under the mayor's section, reduced it by 3,000. So the counselors each went from 2,000 down to 1,000, and the mayor from 5,000 down to 2. So when we look at all the other changes, it just comes in at about a just under $21,000 or 4.9% as the decrease within our area. Still keeping money in for trade missions, as that's every other year. Not sure if that's going to happen or if it would be revamped or changed as things progress. But as we heard tonight during the presentation on economic development, of course, that relationship with Japan is one where we continue to need to nurture it. So we're keeping some funds in there, and it may be a bit more virtual than in the past. Questions of council on that area? Councillor Schattenberg?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Birch. But I guess more just a comment than anything else. I see what the budget is set up for, and we're doing a lot of these things, seminars and whatnot, obviously online through Zoom and whatnot. I thought it was kind of interesting when I signed up for a planning seminar to update us on the provincial property statement for 2020 to get some more information in that direction. That they wanted to know if I had any dietary restrictions when I signed up for this seminar. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know why they wouldn't have removed that from their questionnaire and their sign up form. But I'm looking forward to taking that next month.
We'll see if you end up with Skip the Dishes or someone showing up with a bag lunch for you. Well, everybody's laughing. That's pretty good. Other questions on this area? Well, then that would be it for tonight's meeting. We do have our next regular council meeting. We'll hear from the board, so the police board, the library board, and others, and we'll do a bit of a summary. And again, anytime you have questions or if you have ideas for motions for addition or deletion, share those with your fellow councillors and myself, as well as through the CAO. And looking forward to, after our second regular meeting in March, having this budget adopted for the year. So still a little bit more work to go from both council and staff. Now with that, looking for a motion to adjourn. We'll go Councillor Accioni, seconded by Councillor Lauder. All those in favor? Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.